Now, last week, we were in the book of Judges, and we had been going over the life of Gideon. And so we kind of left off in the middle there, in Judges chapter 7. And I can't quite remember if we went over question 14 or not, but we'll go. No? Okay, perfect. So we'll pick up there. And this is when they're getting ready to attack the Midianite camp. So if you remember, God had been prepping Gideon and his army, preparing them for this battle against the Midianites. And now it's time for Gideon to take action. Gideon had just gotten some assurance from God through this dream that had been revealed from the enemy, actually. And this provided the last little bit of assurance that Gideon needed to know that victory was assured for him. So now, question 14 picks up and says, describe Gideon's battle strategy. Describe Gideon's battle strategy.
I'm waiting on somebody else to line.
Well, it took place at night. It was a surprise attack. And
Okay.
he kind of took advantage of that. There was chaos and confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And the Midians perceived that there were more than there actually were.
Yeah. So this is neat. So Gideon, remember, Gideon's working with 300 men. That's what he has to work with against all these other Midianites. And he takes these 300 men and he divides them into 3 companies. And all of these men, they surround the enemy, and they have trumpets and they have torches that are covered up with pitchers on top. They surround the enemy. They break the pitchers. The torches are lit. They blow trumpets. In effect, they're making a lot of noise. They're making a loud sound, a lot of light, and they surprise the enemy. And the fact that each man did this made it seem like their army was just that much larger than what it really was, to the point where the Midianites panicked and actually began attacking each other in the dark and in the confusion. And so, in the end, they were completely routed. What I think is interesting is that God had prepared Gideon's army, but he didn't give him this specific battle strategy. This was Gideon coming up with this battle strategy. The takeaway there for us today is that while God tells us what our objective is, and he gives us things to do in the New Testament, in many ways it is up to us to decide how to best use our talents and our abilities to execute that task, right? We're told to go preach the gospel, right? It's up to you to know how to best do that in your life. You know, maybe you are someone who's gifted at public speaking and you take advantage of that to be able to spread the word. Maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you lead better by example, and that's how you do it. A little bit more of a passive approach to lead others to Christ. Maybe you're really good at writing, and so you express yourself and your feelings and the gospel through writing, and that's how you win others to Christ. There are many ways that we can take our own abilities and use them towards the objectives that God's laid out in the Bible, just as Gideon did. Now, question 15 says, what was Ephraim's part in the war? There's actually a couple sections. We'll start with just that part first. What was Ephraim's part in the war? Addie, I know you have the answer.
Yes, he was to take the watering holes of springs and so on. So that was his job, or one of his jobs.
Yep. Now, why were they dissatisfied with that? And then to follow that up, how did Gideon calm them down? What was the problem here? The Midianites were their enemy too, right? So they should be happy about all of this, that the Midianites were defeated and that they played a part. But why were they so upset about this?
Because they felt like they didn't have enough of a part.
Yeah, they felt like they didn't have enough of a part. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that sounds a little bit like pride talking, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds like they really wanted a part in the glory. It wasn't necessarily that, it was a zeal for God that was driving this here. They were just prideful. And I think that that is evident in the fact that Gideon is able to calm them down with, a little bit of flattery here, right? So Gideon gives them recognition and compliments them, right? And that is what they needed to be calmed down and to back off. And so to me, that speaks to the fact that this was really their pride that was driving their dissatisfaction. Question 16, we're moving into chapter 8. Question 16 talks about the pursuit of the enemy. So it says, what cities are mentioned as not aiding Gideon in his pursuit of the enemy? And it says, is there any indication why they would not help them, and how were they punished? So this is a three-parter. So first of all, what were the cities that did not aid Gideon in his pursuit of the enemy? We've got two.
Succoth is one, right?
Succoth is one.
Penuel?
And Penuel is the other. Yep. And it says that they didn't, the indication as to why they would not help them was because they did not believe that Gideon's victory was assured, right? They didn't think that he was actually going to be able to seal the deal here. And how were they punished? Each city kind of had got its own punishment. What were those two? For Succoth, it says that the elders were whipped with thorns and briars. And then for Penuel, it says that he tore down their tower and killed the men of their city. And question 17 says, who were Zebah and Zalmunna, and what became of them? A lot of consequences spreading around to people in this chapter. Who are Zebah and Zalmunna?
They were the kings of Midian.
They were the kings of Midian, right. And it says that Gideon took them, right? So he took them hostage, and if you read down later, he actually killed them, right? So they were later executed. Now, as we're getting ready to go into question 18, if you remember last week, one of the things that I mentioned was that this period of time in Judges covers a period of time in Israel's history where they were suffering from moral decline. They were going downhill, right? And you see that over time, as you're reading from the beginning of Judges to the end, that things get worse and worse for them. They keep going through this cycle of judges, right? So they will fall away from God. God appoints a judge. That judge sort of gets them back on track. They repent, and then that judge dies, and then they fall away again. And this cycle keeps repeating. But one thing that you see is that as you go through the judges kind of become less and less desirable to work with. And it just highlights the fact that overall, Israel is going downhill, right? God has less and less to work with in terms of his people. Now, he still uses these sinful, messed up people to do his will and to work good through them, right? But I want to highlight that because just because Gideon is mentioned here as having done good things for God doesn't necessarily mean he's a man of spectacular character in every sense of the word, right? He is mentioned as a character of faith in Hebrews 11. However, Gideon had his flaws, and we're going to start to see those as we dive into these last two questions. So question 18, what was Gideon's life like after the defeat of the Midianites? This is a pretty open-ended one. The question prompts us to list at least 3 points. So give me a couple of highlights as to what Gideon's life was like.
Yeah, a lot of kids.
A lot of kids, a lot of wives.
Or concubines.
Yep.
I don't know how you...
What else?
He made an ephod, and they said it was a snare to him and his household because of having that ephod, like they were worshiping.
Yeah, so part of what happened afterwards is that Gideon actually amassed a pretty good fortune from this. Like he took a cut of the spoils from the battle, and with his cut, he took some of the gold that he received as his share, and he fashioned an ephod out of this. And I don't know if you all remember what that is, but it was essentially like a breastplate of some kind. Okay?
Like the high priest.
Right.
Breastplate, similar.
Right.
This would have been similar, maybe not exactly.
Right. And so he set up this ephod, and you can imagine that I don't know, this is me speculating, right? But you can imagine that Gideon might have originally set this up as something to remember these great victories by. Originally starting out as something with good intentions, something as, let this be a reminder that God led us through, right? But unfortunately, what actually ends up happening is that this becomes more like an idol than anything else. It says it becomes a snare to him and his household, and other people worship it later. And so what may have started out with good intentions ultimately just becomes an idol in the end, right? Again, a good lesson for us today when we think of making symbols of holiness, right? One that comes to my mind is church buildings, just in general. It's very common for people to build buildings in such a way as to make them look majestic, right? Now, usually the intent is that this is meant to invoke feelings of awe in people, and wonder at God's splendor. But in the end, what it really does is it draws people to their awe and wonder of the architect, right? And the structure itself rather than God. And in the end, it ends up taking away from God's glory and putting it towards some inanimate object, right? So it's a similar lesson for us here in what becomes a snare for Gideon. Now, I also have that Gideon was not a king. So they asked Gideon to become a king, and Gideon refused this. And that's a good distinction between a judge and a king. There is a difference there. They were a type of leader, but they were not kings, right? We'll read more about kings and kings. And then, let's see. Question 19, it says, what happened as soon as Gideon was dead? It says that Israel played the harlot. They made Baal-berith their god. And if you look up what Baal-berith translates to, it just means Lord of the Covenant. So they worshipped Baal-berith as their covenant god instead of God as the one who they made a covenant with. Okay. That wraps up the life of Gideon. So before we move on and talk about the next judge, I want to just pause for a second and see if anyone else has any other questions or any other comments.
Since they didn't even show kindness to his family,
Yeah.
in return for, you'd think you would feel something.
Right.
We look back on it, certain presidents kind of like that.
Yeah, and you'd think that all those things would have meant something and didn't. Okay. So let's flip the page here, and we're going to start talking about our next judge, Jephthah. So moving into Judges chapter 11 here, it says, describe Jephthah's background and the kind of man he was. And I think for this one, I do want to read a couple of these verses. So if you want to just go ahead and turn over there in Judges with me to chapter 11 and verse 1. We'll start there. It says, now Jephthah the Gileadite was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. And Gilead had fathered Jephthah. Gilead's wife bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, you shall not have an inheritance in our house, for you are the son of another woman. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. And worthless men gathered around Jephthah, and they went wherever he did. Now it came about after a while that the sons of Ammon fought against Israel. When the sons of Ammon fought against Israel, the elders of Gilead, not to be confused with Jephthah's father, but the town that he was from, it says the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob, and they said to Jephthah, come and be our leader, that we may fight against the sons of Ammon. And we'll stop there for a second. So, based on those verses, tell me a little bit about Jephthah. What kind of man was he?
He was a mighty warrior.
He was a valiant warrior.
And he was a son of a prostitute. That made it really bad for him.
Yeah, he had an unfortunate family background there, and that made his earlier life hard on him. It made him an outcast in his own family, right? So he's a valiant warrior. He's a little bit of an outcast. And it's funny. I've read a couple different commentaries, and it says that when he went to the land of Tob, it says that he was surrounded by worthless men that kind of followed him around. Now, like I said, I've read a few different ideas on what that means. And one just reads it exactly like it is. They were kind of outcasts, worthless men. He was a little bit of a gang leader or a mafia thug, pretty much, Others try and describe it and say that, well, when it says worthless men, it meant men of little value. And so they might have been good men, but just perceived as being poor, right? So now I don't know whichever one you want to take there. I'm inclined to take it a little bit more at face value and say that when it says worthless men, that they weren't great of character. But either way, I wanted to present both options. Yeah.
Yeah, the Amplified says worthless and unprincipled.
There you go.
Which kind of leads to your second part of that, where you're
Yeah. Eileen, did you have a comment?
Well, it does say in verse 3 that they were worthless and banded together with Jephthah and went out raiding.
Yeah, so a couple different translations, and again, a good reason to look at different translations. So yeah, that would suggest then that it really was a little bit more like a mafia or a gang, And again, I think that goes to highlight some of the moral decay. Again, the people that God had to work with weren't great. Now, granted, God has not yet approached Jephthah with a mission or an objective yet, but just to stress the point that the character of these men that he has to work with over time, it's kind of declining, and you can see that. The judges start as pretty good, and then they go to kind of okay and so-so, and by the end, they're just not great at all. So in question 2, it says, how did Jephthah come to be the leader of the Gileadites? And why was he reluctant to accept their offer?
He was reluctant because they drove him off.
Yeah.
But I mean, they called to him, or they summoned him, right?
Yeah. So they went to get him. And I mean, you can imagine if he's been rejected by him before, why he might not be too thrilled at helping them out.
Yeah, maybe he was a good fighter is why they went to get him. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But he was supposed to be a good warrior, and that's why they went after him.
Yeah.
Could be, yeah.
That's the way it sounds, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, well, you weren't good enough, but now that we need you, we want you back.
But now that you have a talent that could be of use to us, maybe you should come back. Yeah, exactly. And if you notice, Jephthah kind of has some conditions there too, right? You notice in verse 9, it says, if you bring me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head? So he's demanding some benefits after they're done, right? So question 3 says, what reason did the Ammonites give for their invasion of Israelite territory, right? So we know that we're under attack now from these Ammonites. And why are they attacking?
They want their land back. They can see that that's still their land after all of those years.
Yeah, they want their land back. They're saying, you stole our land. We want our land back, right? Which leads into question 4. It says, list and analyze each of the 4 arguments found in the following passages that Jephthah made to support Israel's claim that the land east of the Jordan and to refute the Ammonite claim to the same land. So that's a long way to say, like, how does Jephthah state the opposite? How does he disagree with what they say? Now, if you look at verses 14 to 22, we'll start there. Jephthah points out that the Amorites took the land from the Ammonites, and then Israel took the land from the Amorites. So he's saying, you guys already lost it. It wasn't even yours. You lost your claim to it. It was conquered, it was taken from you, and then we took it from them. So we want it, you lost it, so it's ours. That's his first argument. Verses 23 to 24, Jephthah says that God gave it to Israel, right? So now he's not just invoking like a might makes right kind of play. He's invoking that this is divinely gifted to us, right? He says, if it should belong to the Ammonites, their god Chemosh should give it to them, right? So he's talking about which God is leading them. Well, our God gave it to us. If your God wanted you to have it, then why didn't he give it to you, right? If your God's so powerful, then you'd already have it. Verse 25, he says, are you any better than Balak? Right? So now he's appealing a little bit more to their character and showing them, look, like, what makes you so great? You're acting like you're the innocent victim here, and you're really not, right? You're not some innocent character in this. And then finally, he hits up with his last point in verse 26. He says, why did you wait so long to claim it? Right? Hundreds of years have gone by. Why now? Right? If you wanted this land, you had more than your fair share of opportunity to go and get it. Right? Whoops. Hit the wrong button. Okay. So, question 5. After all that, how does Jephthah conclude his negotiations? How does he wrap up this big defense?
He says he didn't sin.
He says, may the Lord
So they're
judge
the ones that
this
did
day
wrong.
between the
Yeah.
Israelites and the Ammonites.
He basically says, look, you're accusing us, but really it's you who are in the wrong here. You're the ones who are wronging us, and we're going to let God be the judge of this, right? So that's how he wraps it up. Let's see. All right. Question 6. It says, Jephthah's vow and the victory over the Ammonites. So Jephthah makes this vow. What is this vow that he makes?
That he would give the first thing that came out of his door.
He would give the first thing, yep, the first thing that he sees come out of his door, he would sacrifice this to God. And it says, did he really offer his daughter as a sacrifice, or was the vow fulfilled in another way? So they kind of give away what he sees, right? He sees his daughter come out. And obviously, Jephthah's upset by this. You know, his daughter runs out. He had made this vow. And it says, did he really offer his daughter as a sacrifice, or was the vow fulfilled in another way? And then explain.
I think he offered his daughter.
You think he offered his daughter?
I do. Well, she went around to mourn her life for 2 months, with a 2 months, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she came back, I think she was sacrificed as he kept his vow.
Mm-hmm. What is another possible explanation? So that's one, right? One is that he actually did sacrifice his daughter.
It says she abstained before entering into marriage, so she must have married.
Let's turn over to Leviticus. Turn over to Leviticus with me. Chapter 27. Leviticus chapter 27, and we'll read verses 2 to 4, okay? It says, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when someone makes an explicit vow, he shall be valued according to your assessment of persons belonging to the Lord. If your assessment is of a male from 20 years even to 60 years old, then your assessment shall be 50 shekels of silver by the shekel of the sanctuary. Or, if the person is female, then your assessment shall be 30 shekels. Basically, one possible explanation here is that he's in a rock and a hard place because he's made this foolish vow, and now he's looking for a way to fulfill it. And one explanation is that he could have essentially sold his daughter to Tabernacle service, right? So she is now a servant for the Tabernacle, as stated in Leviticus. Now, we know that there are examples of this in other places of the Bible. So if you turn to Exodus chapter 38, In verse 8, it says, in Exodus 38, verse 8, it says, "Moreover, he made a basin of bronze with its base of bronze from the mirrors of the serving women who served at the doorway of the tent of meeting." Right? So we see an example of this, of women serving at the tabernacle. You can also see another example of this in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and 22. So we have a couple instances of women serving at the tabernacle there. This would have been one way that he could have given her to God. Personally, from the way that I read the text, I don't think that that is likely. However, some biblical scholars do interpret it that way, as a way that he could have potentially fulfilled that vow. I think that it's more likely that he sacrificed her at this point. Now, getting into question 7 here, would a human sacrifice have been in harmony with God's will?
Absolutely not.
No. And it's expressly stated that way, right? In Leviticus 18 and 21, it gives a couple other verses here in Deuteronomy. It forbids that kind of sacrifice. That's not what God wants, right? Jephthah basically made a foolish vow when he did this. Clearly, he wasn't thinking about sacrificing a person when he made this vow, right? But he was foolish to make this kind of vow, and he put himself in a bad spot. Now, it would have been better for him to admit, I made a foolish vow. I'm going to have to break the vow, right? And not be able to keep my promise to God, which is bad. But it's better than making a foolish vow and then doing something like sacrificing his daughter.
That's why you're not supposed to vow.
Right, exactly. And we can,
You can't really break it.
if you read over in Ecclesiastes, if you want to turn over there, Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verses 1 to 2 warns us against this kind of thing, of making foolish vows. It says, "Guard your steps as you go to the house of God, and approach to listen, rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Do not be quick with your mouth, or impulsive in thought, to bring up a matter in the presence of God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few." Also, in Ecclesiastes 5, just a couple verses down, in verses 4 to 6, it says, "When you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you not vow than vow and not pay. Do not let your speech cause you to sin, and do not say in the presence of the messenger of God that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry on account of your voice and destroy the work of your hands?" So bottom line, we're warned against making foolish vows, right? Because they put you in tough situations where you can't fulfill something, and we're told that. We have limited power as humans on earth. I can tell you that tomorrow I'm going to go to the supermarket because I want to pick something up there, but I don't really know that for a fact. I can say I want to go there, and I might really want to go there, but my car could break down and I can't make it there. And then I call a friend for a ride and they're unavailable, and I could literally just not be able to get there, right? So we're warned of making vows that we can't deliver on, right? That's why we're told for our yes to be yes and our no to be no. Okay.
But it does say he carried out his vow.
Is that what your version says?
He said what?
Yeah. It says she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow with
Yeah.
her, which he had vowed.
Yeah, and so
They mourned for Israelite mourned for her for 4 days every year.
see my version, and again, I believe that he sacrificed her as well, right? For those who think that he sold her for service of the tabernacle, they think that when she mourned, it was because of the fact that she was so young, right? It says she goes away with her friends to mourn over that for a while before this was fulfilled. They think it's basically like the women who were normally sold into this were later on in life, and that because she was younger, she was mourning that she was going into service at such a young age. And then the fact that he delivered on his vow would have been the fact that he actually gave her over to God, right? So again, that's not the way that I personally interpret that, but I want to make sure that I offer those out for you guys to see so you can weigh that and interpret that and decide what you think based on the verses.
That's really conflicting with what it says here.
And I agree with that. I agree. However, I want to make sure that, like I said, I'm presenting some of the two most popular beliefs. Obviously, you're going to read these verses and you're going to come up with your own conclusion of what it's actually saying, right? Sometimes Scripture can be that way, where there are two likely explanations. But it doesn't ever change what the root message is, right? Whether or not Jephthah sacrificed his daughter, whether or not he gave her over to tabernacle service, the bottom line is that the man made a very foolish mistake in vowing something that he should have never have vowed. And it led to consequences for him one way or another. So, something to keep in mind.
But reading this, you would not, where do you get, where they institute the tabernacle idea?
In Leviticus 27, verses 2 to 4.
You can't make, it's not reference to that in mine either.
Mine doesn't have that in the footnotes either. I'm saying when I read the commentary, that is what they referred to as the reason that they believed that was the interpretation. Some people have a hard time thinking that Jephthah actually went through with sacrificing his own daughter, right? And that's possible that, let me back up. Bad things happen in the Bible, and that's difficult for some people, and that leads to different interpretations of thinking, how is it possible that maybe this man didn't do that? And again, this is one theory. That doesn't mean that I'm telling you that that's a fact. I want to make sure that if that is plausible at all, and which it is possible based on Leviticus chapter 27, I want to make sure that I put that in front of you so that I'm not telling you that this is exactly how it is, right? There are different interpretations, and I want you to study on your own and be able to determine what you believe based on your reading is true, okay? My opinion, in the way that I read the verses myself, is that he did, in fact, sacrifice his daughter, okay? Donna, did you have a...
Well, you pretty much said it already. I think as a society, men have trouble, men, women, all of us, have trouble accepting that God will allow certain things. But the fact is that God does allow it.
Yeah.
And, if they don't like it, well, too bad for them because it's in the Bible. They can read it, and that's how it is.
Yeah. And now if you look at this book that we're teaching out of, it says, did he really offer his daughter as a sacrifice, or was the vow fulfilled another way, right? So when you say, well, what other possible explanation could there be? That's the one that other Bible scholars have come up with, right? So that's why I present it to you, because otherwise this question in the book doesn't make any sense, right?
I'm not arguing with you.
Oh, I know. And I don't want any of you to think that, right? That I understand. And that's why we come to Bible study, is because it's good for us to look at these verses, right? We're supposed to rightly divide the word of truth.
See, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, I think that it's very hard to understand some of the things that did happen in the Bible. Like, let's see, when they tried to balance the Ark of the Covenant and they were killed, it's like, to me, they were trying to do a good thing and they died. But God said, don't do that. Don't touch it.
And it says that David had a problem with that for a while too. So you're not the only one who's struggled with things in the Bible before.
And God's justice is not like our justice.
Right. Now, we have gone pretty far over here. It is a good discussion, and I hate to close it when we're having so much fun with this, but we really do need to get to the invitations. So if you guys want to talk about it more, we can absolutely review it again next week. But for tonight, we're going to have to put a pin in it. All right.
Well, now I regret not choosing those verses for the basis of the invitation, but I did not. Okay. I'm looking at Matthew 8, verses 23 through 26. This is just a few verses to look at here. Now, when he, speaking of Jesus, got into a boat, his disciples followed him. And suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea, so that the boat was covered with the waves. But he, Jesus again, was asleep. Then his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we are perishing. But he said to them, Why are you fearful, O you of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. Notice when Jesus got into the boat, the disciples followed him. Everything was fine. Everything was nice and calm. And then they get out to sea, and they're just relaxing, I guess, and enjoying the ride. And then the storm comes up. The waves are high over the boat, and I imagine that was, they said they were afraid that they were going to perish. So I'm assuming that it was scary and that, it was a treacherous thing. Now, at this point, they're scared and they're not sure what to do, and they turn to the Lord, right? Now, that's the right thing to do. I'm not putting that down. I wonder sometimes if we're, not doing some of the same things, though, in kind of an off way, that maybe we follow Jesus when everything's going okay. We don't really kind of question it. We just kind of go along, and then we're just relaxing. We're just, riding the boat, taking the ride, just going along. And then, all of a sudden, there's problems, there's issues. We've just kind of been going along, kind of following, but kind of leaving him alone too. Just Jesus was asleep in the boat. They weren't really bothering him. They weren't really interacting with him. And then we have the storm. Then we have trouble in our life. Some issue we didn't expect occurs, or, then we run to the Lord. And again, that is a good thing that we know where to go and who to go to. But shouldn't we really expect the storms? I mean, they had been out on that sea plenty of times. Didn't they know that sea had storms? I would think they were fishermen, some of them, right? So I think they knew that there were storms out there. They should have kind of expected some of that. And I'm thinking that similarly in our lives, we should expect storms and trouble and problems. Jesus said we would have tribulation. So we shouldn't be surprised. God does not promise us the easy way through life. The Lord actually promises us the narrow, difficult way, not the easy way. The easy way is the wrong way. So, we can walk and follow the Lord because he guides us. Because he's with us, we can take the difficult path. We can weather those storms just like they did. I mean, he didn't let them down. He didn't fail them. And he won't fail us. He will go with us through these storms and make sure that we get through them. I'm just saying we should kind of expect them, not be really surprised and suddenly worried and afraid. We should expect problems and issues as we go through life and know that the Lord is with us and he will help us. So we need to be aware of these problems, and not just sit back and wait until we think we're ready to perish and then call on the Lord. We don't want to wait till it's almost too late, because we could mess up and actually wait until it's too late. We want to make sure that we've got the Lord's attention all the time, before the storm hits. Know that we're in that right standing and that we're in the right place with him, and that we're not just sitting back and kind of relaxing and kind of sliding off. So if anyone here has any personal storm or need that you would need prayers for, or if you need the Lord for any reason, please come forward as we stand and sing.